So when we start off with foreign exchange, if you study from notes before 2023, you end up studying too much and a lot of complicated stuff you do. Bamford's important है. It's since 2023 onwards, अभी तक सिर्फ 4 questions आए हैं. Um, ग्राफ रिलेटेड क्वेश्चंस आ चुके हैं. अप्रिसिएशन डेप्रिसिएशन के एडवांटेजेस डिसएडवांटेजेस पे आ गए, कॉजेस पे आ गए हैं. बट यू नो दैट इट्स ओनली फ्लोटिंग एक्सचेंज रेट व्हिच इज कमिंग इन योर कोर्स, राइट? लास्ट जून के अंदर हमारे पास एक क्वेश्चन आ चुका है इन आर वेरिएंट related to, I believe, depreciation. We're going to take a look at that question also. But there's not much in this particular topic. But the thing is, when we're doing macro, we have to be able to take any topic and then start making connection to other macroeconomic topics, right? That's the beauty of macroeconomics. Inflation can affect exchange rate can affect inflation. So you need to know that trail of thought in most simplistic terminologies and explanation. You just make one after the other the connections, and you know. Um, so I actually enjoy macro more because of this discussions that you can do, and you can always counter them as well. तो अगर हम ये वाला क्वेश्चन देखते हैं, this is how we'll start. We'll deal with first appreciation का question which came, and then we'll do some depreciation. There are more depreciation related questions than appreciation. हमारे variant में अभी तक appreciation नहीं आया है. So this is March 2023, variant 22. And it says, with the help of a diagram, explain what is meant by an appreciation of a floating exchange rate and consider whether a country can only benefit from appreciation on its currency. So, a few things. Obviously, the question requires you to make a diagram. So that's what one of the things that we're going to do. And uske saath, appreciation is just one part of this whole thing. Floating exchange rate system, I don't know if you need to define it or not. I would say, Carlo, just in case, but what it is meant by appreciation, if we were to do it for 2 to 3 marks, I would recommend this is how you start. First, define floating. There's no mark for it, at least for this marking scheme, but you should always define floating exchange rate. And in very simple terms, you can say that in a floating exchange rate, the demand and the supply for currency determines the exchange rate. Okay. That's the definition of a floating exchange rate. फिर
Which
एक
isn't
चीज
in
ये
the syllabus.
fixed and managed is not in your syllabus. Only thing in your syllabus is floating exchange rate system. That's it. So demand and supply for currency determines the exchange rate. How about even like defining what exchange rate means? I think it's not going to take much away from you. It's not a bad idea to do it. That what does it mean? Exchange rate का मतलब क्या होता है? So we can just simply say the exchange rate is an external uh, value, external value of one country's currency, in terms of another. ठीक है. Then you can do the floating. Mark है या नहीं है? I think it's not a bad idea to always do that. And then what you really have to explain is your अप्रिसिएशन का मतलब क्या होता है, राइट? दैट इज द मस्ट थिंग। वैसे तो डायग्राम, आई डोंट नो, एक सेकंड मार्किंग सी में देख लेंगे, बट there's a diagram requirement, so if there are 1 mark for it, 2 marks for it, वो देखना पड़ेगा, because they're just saying one diagram, right? Appreciation can happen because of the rising demand and a falling supply of the currency, तो दोनों हो सकते हैं। So appreciation को हम explain करेंगे by saying that appreciation is when there is a rise in the external value of a country's currency in terms of another country's currency. According to Bamford की भी मैं definition इसकी बता देता हूँ appreciation की. It says an increase in the international price of a currency caused by market forces. Right? So it's sort of like, you know, uh, whether you write that, whether you write this, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Now, as far as the diagram goes, they have asked you for a diagram. I would personally draw two diagrams. एक ही में I will avoid कि एक ही में मैं दोनों चीजें शो कर दूं. So let's do it for the dollars. It's one of the most common ones. जब हम diagrams की बात करते हैं तो usually they do want कि आप कोई ना कोई currencies की values लिखें. So one thing is, if I'm making a diagram for the dollar against, let's say, with the pound, I'll take the Bamford's information only, that in a dollar, how many pounds you can buy, right? So this is how the label would be: pound, kitne pounds over the dollar. This is basically called, if you read it, kahin na kahin, this is price of dollars in terms of pounds, right? That's what it is. Then you have demand curve always downward sloping. आज तक कभी भी इस पे क्वेश्चन नहीं आया कि why is demand curve downward sloping or why is the supply curve upward sloping. In our lectures, we do explain. If you go and see my lectures, उसके अंदर I've explained it completely. And do we give numbers? Honestly, you don't need to give numbers. It's just a waste of time. ऊपर से और कोई errors अगर तुमने कर दिए तो और problem हो जाएगी उसके अंदर. So I'll basically do two diagrams over here, और एक के अंदर हम appreciation दिखाना है, right? So our focus is appreciation. So one thing that can happen is if the demand for dollars go up, um, our currency is going to appreciate, right? So you can do some labels to make sure that nothing is. Usually इसके अंदर we don't care for x-axis as much, लेकिन जरूर बना लिया करो. Equilibrium अच्छा हो जाता है. Yeah, so with some yeah, so demand's going up, that is causing appreciation, that is causing the price of dollars to rise in terms of the pounds. Or दूसरा diagram is the supply curve shifting to the left, causing our currency again to rise. I think we should always draw the diagram and also write an explanation of it. Okay. Because it says what is meant by appreciation, it's not about the cause, but rather what is meant by appreciation. So I think in our writing, मैं तो कहूंगा कि हमेशा एक एक cause जरूर दे दिया करो. I think it's always wise to do that. Like, for example, in the first one, if you're saying there's a rise in the demand, let's keep it simple. A good simple example could be that if US's exports to UK rises, then demand for dollars will increase as UK citizens will need to buy dollars to pay for exports, right? And this will cause the demand for dollars to increase and then cause appreciation to happen. I think ये एक बहुत simple सा example है, and it's a correct one. I feel this later part is all you should always explain. You know how when we're saying demand will rise, तो export की वजह से क्यों demand? Because UK citizens have pounds and Americans accept the dollars. That's our assumption. जैसे पाकिस्तान के केस में वी डू एक्सेप्ट डॉलर्स आल्सो, बट हम अपने लेबर को तो रुपये में पे करते हैं. तो इवेंचुअली इवन इफ वी डू एक्सेप्ट द डॉलर्स वी हैव टू कन्वर्ट इट इनटू रुपीस, राइट? तो सिमिलरली द यूके have the pounds and they have to buy the dollars. They're going to sell their pounds either and buy the dollars, and the demand for dollars will rise as a result of this. तो ये एक हमारा अच्छा explanation है, बहुत simple है, cause है, I know, but you know, एक cause जरूर लिख दिया करो. Make a habit out of this. Okay. Now, the supply for dollars is falling. That means the Americans are importing less. तो इसके अंदर हम simple लिख सकते हैं USA imports from UK has fallen. Therefore, the supply for pounds has fallen and shifted to the left. That has also caused currency to appreciate. Something along this line. I think that should be good enough. बहुत है, plentiful है. एक second marking scheme देख लेते हैं. So knowledge and understanding में the marking scheme is saying for a clear knowledge and understanding of the meaning of appreciation of an exchange rate in the floating exchange rate system, that is the exchange rate rises according to supply and demand. See, ये थोड़े से demand and supply को लेते हुए जा रहे हैं. I think the blend of things that we've written ऊपर will sort of like will take all of this into account. The diagram showing an appreciation of the currency, correctly label of the diagram, vertical. Okay, so what do they want on the axis is? The vertical axis needs to be labeled either in terms of two currency or as exchange rate. So they're accepting exchange rate. I would personally say कि जैसे हमने किया है ना, just work with that. And a rise in the value of currency by a rightward shift of the demand curve and or a leftward shift in the supply curve with the new equilibrium price shown together with an explanation of a possible cause of either shift. Possible cause, right? So that means cause is relevant, and slash or लिखा है, so that means only one is also acceptable. कि उसी का cause आपने लिखा है और rightward shift के बारे में लिखा है. We've done both, so we're pretty much covering all ground. I'm just saying, let's just be cautious and make sure that we are writing all relevant bits.
Says one diagram though.
It says a diagram, so obviously उसमें bracket में S नहीं लिखा हुआ और so एक ही के अंदर तुम दोनों भी show कर सकते हो with your final equilibrium, and you should be able to make two separate ones also because वो and लिखा हुआ है. You have to make sure that you are showing a new equilibrium price going upwards. Either you do it together. If you do it together, this demand will shift to the right, the supply will go left. तो फिर ये यहाँ पे आप final एक equilibrium बना सकते हो अपना. Don't make it फिर halfway. If you are shifting the supply curve to the left, then do it on the final, very final equilibrium, showing a rise in the prices. These should be fine as well. No problem whatsoever. Okay, so question के अंदर भी उन्होंने आपको they have given you the space to do one or two, both. Does not matter. Here, the second part of the question says, consider whether a country can only benefit from appreciation of its exchange rate. So probably just 3 marks, and you have to write advantages and disadvantages of appreciation. पैम्फलेट के अंदर भी basically they've spent time basically after explanation of the diagrams they're talking about the causes, what causes the the demand and the supply to shift, and then the macroeconomic objectives, right? So we have to be really, really good with that because eventually वो benefits को हम उसी के साथ ही connect कर सकते हैं. So, for example, this is what we're dealing with. If our currency appreciates, what are the advantages of it? Okay. So appreciation के साथ, what we know is a couple of things, and then you can decide इसको किस तरीके से याद करना है for the advantages and disadvantages. When our currency appreciates, my first uh, chain of writing is appreciation causes the price of exports to rise and eventually the quantity of exports to fall, leading to, ignoring the elasticities, let's leave that to evaluation. Overall, what should happen is your exports should fall, and price of imports falling will cause the the purchase of imports to rise, eventually cause the imports to go up. Now, this is where I'll make the connection with अगर आपका overall net exports is falling, that means entirety के अंदर your AD is falling. Okay? So if your AD is falling, now you can make a lot of discussions about, okay, number one, इसी में मैं advantages और disadvantages में इसको separate कर लेता हूँ, but we would like when you're writing your essays to be very organized. First write the advantages and then go for the disadvantages in very like clear paragraphs. And you start off your paragraph by saying, okay, so the advantages of appreciation is, and then the disadvantages is this. Okay, so as far as advantages can go, is when aggregate demand falls, and let's assume if economy is at full employment, that LRAS का जो vertical side होता है, if economy is at full employment, then this can reduce demand pull inflation. So that's one advantage I can think of. Okay, the demand pull inflation can come under control a little. फिर उसके अलावा in advantages, another connection that I would like to see is that when you're saying that the price of import falls, so we can say that now people can afford more imported goods, therefore the standard of living rises. That's one discussion you can make. Another is that the cost of raw materials, this one we really like actually, the cost of raw material falls, so firms can supply more, leading to reduction in cost push inflation. You notice when I'm shifting the aggregate supply to the right, मैंने लिखा, it reduces the price levels, right? It reduces inflation. But we would like कि अगर aggregate supply increase हो रहा है तो you can say by cost push inflation reduce हो रही है. If AD is falling, you'll say demand pull inflation reduce हो रही है. So appreciation can cause these three sort of advantages for you. So ये अच्छे advantages हैं. Other than that, if you can think of more, sure, you can, right? But these are the most typical ones that we do talk about. फिर as far as the disadvantage goes, disadvantage के अंदर of appreciation, you know how this AD is falling, now you can do a lot with this. तो अगर economy के अंदर the AD is falling, we know that the economic growth rate is falling, your unemployment is rising, और ये कौन सी वाली unemployment है? Because AD is shifting, तो थोड़ा सा let's complicate things. So this unemployment which is rising is your cyclical one. So unemployment भी जब हम बताते हैं तो थोड़ा सा type के साथ जो है your answers value sort of like goes up. That you say, okay, so if the AD is falling down, that's sort of like because of the cyclical of the economy, it's happening because of that. So आपकी cyclical unemployment correct हो जाएगी. Sorry, cyclical unemployment will rise. Okay, because of this part, x minus m की वजह से what will happen to your current account? We say your current account is going to get worsen. So you can write about that also. I think मैं personally I don't like when students just simply write कि current account को ये हो जाएगा and that's a current account worsening is a bad thing. Not necessarily. I can argue on the other side, depends on the cause. So if we're saying that the current account is worsening as a result of appreciation, then you want to sort of like connect के इससे क्या होगा? तो इससे ये होगा कि the country might have to take on more debt. Okay? So if you're taking on more debt, then you will have to make higher interest payments. That's how I feel कि फिर you should connect it to that. Otherwise, just saying current account worsens sometimes they do accept that, but sometimes they don't. So make sure that don't leave it like that. Acha. Other than that, things like they should accept something like जैसे advantages के अंदर if our currency appreciates and you have your country has debt and we have to pay interest, so the value of interest that we have to pay falls, right? Our currency becomes stronger, so it becomes cheaper for us to buy the foreign currency and make those debt repayments. So that should be also allowed. So yeah, आपका एक overall the advantages and disadvantages की बात हो जाती है. Obviously, I've written quite a lot. अगर मैं आपको सिर्फ pamphlet what the marking scheme is saying. All right. So here they're saying in the analysis of the potential advantages of an appreciation, such as reduction in the price of import. So they're allowing that both of finished goods and of raw materials, reduce inflationary pressures in the economy, and analysis of the potential disadvantages of the appreciation, such as increase in the price of exports, making them less competitive. So yeah, basic, just this information is also acceptable to them. What we have done is like, yeah, this appreciation ka is like your 12 marker. ये जो पूरा explanation मैंने किया हुआ है, appreciation ka, you can have an argument on the for side, against side, maximum ticks you're going to get. Like for example, if this was a 12 marker, you would have gotten a couple of marks for this whole explanation, and then एक दो uh, about एक mark इधर, एक mark इधर, एक mark इधर. So kind of like 3 marks right here, another 3 ticks, then एक tick here, एक tick here, एक tick here. So almost कितने हो गए? 1 2 3 4 5 6, sort of like 7 8. So almost like 8 ticks हो गए हैं तुम्हारे of the whole advantages and disadvantages. And then the last bit, in fact, let me give you a little view over here because remember यहाँ पे देखो क्या लिखा हुआ है, this MLC. MLC may be rewarded but must not be expected as they are A2 topics. We do teach and मेरा ख्याल है मेरे पुराने lectures के अंदर भी if you do see, you may come across this situation um, where we may I might discuss the J curve and the Marshall Lerner's condition, but it's not part of your course. So आप क्या करेंगे? You want to just have that discussion in terms of elasticity. Okay, not too complicated, but just a simple concept, a simple idea. I'll थोड़ा सा मैं मार्शल लर्नर्स भी तुमको बता दूंगा. But maximum what we want for evaluation is, you know how when we say your currency appreciates, we say the appreciation causes the price of exports to rise, and that may cause the export revenue to fall. But this is actually questionable. Why? Because it depends that when the price rises, if the PED for exports is greater than 1, then what we know is that the percentage change in the quantity of exports is greater than the percentage change in the price. So what we know is that the price is rising, exports ki, the quantity is falling by much larger. So your exports revenue, if it's elastic, only in that case, this exports revenue will fall. However, if the PED for your exports is less than 1, then what do you know? That the percentage change in quantity for exports, ये जो fall आ रहा है, that's a much smaller fall, okay? And the change in the price in elastic के case के अंदर, the change in the price for exports is much larger. So you are raising your prices a lot, but the quantity is not falling by much. So eventually, what it will do is that your exports revenue is going to rise. If you're going this way with this explanation, I would really like that your explanation should be very crystal clear. Otherwise, you're just going to give the examiner the opportunity to just say too vague that I don't, the kid has just written कि elasticity की वजह से हो जाएगा. It's not clear as much. I think sometimes examiners may accept कि अगर elastic है तो exports revenue is gonna fall, so therefore it might not be beneficial. And if it's inelastic, then it would may be beneficial for them actually. The appreciation will improve the current account surplus, and so that should be valid. They're accepting. Same goes with the imports. कि अगर imports जो हैं, if the what we're saying is appreciation causes the imports prices to fall. So if the goods imports PD for imports is elastic, then a fall will lead to a very large increase in imports, and it can benefit consumers in a lot of ways. तो आप उस तरह से भी इस बात को discuss कर सकते हो that is going to have a much larger percentage change in the imports, and that can really improve the people's living standards in comparison to the price. But we know कि इस केस के अंदर unfortunately जो आपका import expenditure है, that is going to go up a lot and it may hurt. So along this line you can go. अगर imports जो हैं वो अगर inelastic हैं, so the percentage change in the quantity of imports will be a lot lesser and the percentage change in price will be greater. So your import expenditure is actually going to fall and it may benefit people. So it's up to you how you want to go about it. But this is basically the general concept behind this particular essay, right? We've very extensively dealt with this one with a lot lesser information. A lot more marks can be gained over here. Okay, so let me try another one. Let's do एक 2023 के अंदर ही एक और क्वेश्चन आया है. Let me open this one. So इसमें क्या होता है? It says with the help of a diagram, explain the likely causes of a depreciation of the floating exchange rate and consider whether such a depreciation is always beneficial. So now it's the opposite that we want to do, right? Easy question hai. Similarly, we would like to deal with this one. Agar hum dekhein, so first, again, I would recommend some terms that you should define is एक तो हमको I think explain करना चाहिए floating exchange rate. ठीक है, that's I think आप explain कर सकते हैं. Floating exchange rate. Sorry, first you define the exchange rate, then you can define the floating exchange rate. That the currency value is determined by the demand and the supply forces. Then we want to define depreciation. Depreciation is a fall in the external, I personally, ये मैंने add किया हुआ है, external value of one country's currency in terms of another. Bamford defines it a little differently. Bamford says, let me just read the depreciation definition. It says, a decrease in the international price of currency caused by the market forces. That's depreciation. So fall in the international prices. Acceptable. फिर उसके बाद we know that the depreciation is happening because of two reasons. एक depreciation होता है because of the fall in the demand for the currency, and one is because of increase in the supply of the currency. Again, यहाँ तो बड़ा clearly लिखा हुआ है likely causes. So in the causes, we want to make sure that so keeping it simple again, you can just simply talk about how the demand for exports are falling, and it could be because of the falling quality. It could be because of higher relative inflation rate, right? So if USA is going through higher relative inflation in comparison to whatever your other currency, country and currency you're talking about. So if it's pounds, then you can talk about um, UK. ठीक. So inflation से क्या होगा? If our country, USA, is going through higher inflation, so obviously our products will be relatively more expensive. Hence, the demand for dollars will fall because the UK citizens will buy less, and so they will have to buy less of it. Dusra is simply because of the supply of dollars is increasing. Various reasons you can talk about it if you want to like complicate things. मैं इसको एक hot money. Let me give like a hot money का एक idea. So let's say if US ka interest rate, the relative interest rate is lower than UK. So the Americans will realize that it's not so attractive to invest in US, and it's more attractive to invest in UK in investment terms. So it will cause a hot money outflow, and in order to invest in UK, the Americans will have to sell their dollars, which will increase the supply and shift the supply curve to the right and eventually weaken the currency. In terms of the diagrams, pretty much उसी तरह के हमारे दो diagrams बन जाएंगे, but in this instance, we're going to shift the supply curve to the एक में to the right और दूसरे के अंदर demand to the left, right? So again, इसके अंदर भी they haven't asked for diagrams. It's only one diagram they want us to work with. So let's do pound over the dollars. You have the demand for the dollars, supply for the dollars, right? So that's the quantity and that's the price. And the two things that is expected out of you is जैसे ऊपर explanation में मैंने बताया एक के अंदर आप डिमांड कम कर रहे हैं दूसरे के अंदर आप सप्लाई बढ़ा रहे हैं. Eventually, the result is that the price needs to fall in both the cases. So the price is falling, and I've shown it with my. Don't miss out on any labels no matter what happens, please. Labels are really, really important for us. This is how you're supposed to do it. If I show you the marking scheme for it, एक नजर देख लें what is happening here. All right, so knowledge and understanding the demand for and the supply for a currency shown through an accurate diagram with correct labels, 8 mark. Correctly labeled demand and supply diagram showing appropriate shifts. Okay, so diagram ka hi. So in this particular question, same variant, if you see, all 3 marks are given for the diagrams, right? Causes की तो कोई बात ही नहीं हो रही इसके अंदर, which is a weird thing. कि knowledge and understanding के अंदर, because usually what we've seen is कि पहले part के अंदर causes का word है, और यहाँ पे brackets में diagrams हैं. तो आई गेस लेट्स सी कि आगे जाके इन्होंने कुछ बात की है. Uses the diagram to explain what could cause a shift. Now, this is going in the analysis for this particular, जो हमने पहले knowledge सोच के लिखी हुई थी. So for our diagrams, they're giving us 3 marks, but then shifts के they are also suggesting कि supply के अंदर right shift हो जाए या demand के अंदर left shift हो जाए, उसकी causes की बात होनी चाहिए. That's part of analysis. And then at the same time, they're saying consideration of potential advantages and disadvantages of depreciation. So ये 3 marks के लिए किस चीज के लिए ये लोग mark देने वाले हैं? One thing that I see which is odd over here is that they haven't mentioned कि किस चीज पे, that usually otherwise they always give you these sort of, you know, marks के bullet points and something in at least your 8 marker, and they're not doing that over here. So this is sort of strange. Um, right. So I think we should stick with our consistency. अभी तक हमने क्या discussion किया है? We've discussed the causes, we've done the diagrams, we've shown everything, we've shown the uh, definitions and all, hoping के 3 marks के अंदर that would qualify. And depreciation के advantages and disadvantages, we would like to go and then have a separate discussion for the additional 3 marks. I'll do it at the level of a 12 marker, and then उसमें से आपने जो information examiner give him the right to choose, right? कि, you know, when we're checking and we know कि 3 marks ही है for advantages and disadvantage, so maybe 2 advantage, one disadvantage, you know, something along those lines. But we need to have an advantage and a disadvantage. So at least 1 mark के लिए at least one counter होना चाहिए, either the advantage or the disadvantage. And examiner is going to pick it himself. उसके बाद all information, even if you've given, he can't give you additional marks, obviously. But if your 3 marks are done, all right, great. We're just going to very quickly skim through the rest. It won't even matter if it's correct or not, because आपके 3 marks पूरे हो जाएंगे. So when your currency depreciates, the price of export falls, and that causes the quantity for exports to rise, and eventually the exports revenue to go up. The price of imports rises, and that causes the imports to fall and your import expenditure to go down. और फिर उसके बाद this whole thing, your X minus M, your net exports improves. So eventually improving our aggregate demand, right? So now over here, from the advantage point of view, I'll do exactly what I did in my previous essay. If AD is increasing, तो अगर मैं कुछ disadvantages की बात करना चाहूँ, तो one thing I'll talk about is the demand pull inflation it'll come. But I will have to give a little, background here. I'm talking about this particular position, that if our LRAS is at our full potential, and if you increase AD because of depreciation, if AD increases, it will cause demand pull. So what I'll write is that, if economy is at full employment, then demand pull inflation is likely to happen. So that's one bad thing that we can see. Uske baad, price of import is rising to few things. Ek to, please elaborate. I'm just very quickly going over it. Debt repayments becomes expensive. Okay, one thing. Another, raw material price rises, जिसकी वजह से we can expect cost push inflation to happen. Uh, Price of import rising, makes standard of living poor for the people because they won't be able to consume as much of imported goods. So ये मेरे थोड़े से disadvantages हो गए. Now, from the advantages point of view, when AD increases, so your economic growth increases, people's incomes will rise, you know, अगेन एडी की वजह से बात हो रही है तो स्ट्रक्चरल एम्प्लॉयमेंट जो है, अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट जो है वो फॉल कर जाएगी पॉजिटिव, एंड पीपल विल मेक मोर इनकम्स, देयर स्टैंडर्ड ऑफ लिविंग विल राइज एज अ रिजल्ट ऑफ दैट. अदर देन दैट, यहाँ से हम उठा सकते हैं कि हमारा करंट अकाउंट जो है वो इम्प्रूव हो जाएगा, तो वी वोंट हैव टू टेक सो मच डेट एंड ऑल. तो उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से इट कुड बी बेनिफिशियल फॉर अस. You see, so acha khasa point hai. This is almost like a 12 marker that I've sort of like suggested. Let me just go. Oh, marking scheme के अंदर तो कुछ खास बात हुई भी नहीं थी. But to talk about evaluation, consider whether such a depreciation is always beneficial. So again, always के अंदर, they're writing it very like not really good. Again, इसको आप elasticity के साथ connect कर सकते हैं. So my discussion in elasticity is that अगर हमारा जो गुड है जिसको हम एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं, if that is elastic, my valuation is saying that if it is elastic, then we can experience the exports revenue to rise. But if it's inelastic, then it's not going to increase and AD is not going to have a much of an impact. उसी तरीके से imports की आप बात कर सकते हैं कि if it's inelastic, not much quantity fall will happen. So people will still continue to consume the good, but at much higher prices. Import expenditure may keep on rising for them. But if it's elastic, then import expenditure can fall and it can have its own advantages. ठीक, so something along this line, we would like this particular essay to go in direction wise. ठीक. इसके अलावा जो हमारा वेरिएंट के अंदर जो क्वेश्चन आया था, तो लेट मी जस्ट टॉक अबाउट दैट बिकॉज हाउ डिड वी चेक आवर्स. ये 2024 में आया है, सो इट्स बीन अ व्हाइल, राइट? सो पूरा 25 के अंदर इन आवर वेरिएंट क्वेश्चंस डिड नॉट कम, एंड बल्कि हमारा कब आया है? या नो, सो दिस इज नॉट इन आवर वेरिएंट. या हमारा 2025 में आया. एक मैं बहुत जल्दी से ये दिखा देता हूं. Okay, so now your question structure can be something like this also. ठीक है? It says explain what is meant by a depreciation or of the exchange rate, and consider whether a depreciation is likely to increase domestic real output. So you see, the question is focusing, the later part of the question is focusing on one objective. So now you can't do that, all those objectives that we were doing, कि prices को ये हो जाएगा, or you know, unemployment को ऐसा हो जाएगा and all of that. So now we can't do that. ठीक है? Now your question is all about AD, and eventually AD की वजह से जब AD राइट पे या लेफ्ट पे शिफ्ट होता है, तो on the y x axis जो real output है, what is going on with that? ठीक है? So the question is not so different. If I show you the marking scheme, let's just work with the marking scheme because it's just the same explanation that we are dealing with. So let's just take a look at this one. So it says an accurate definition of the exchange rate. So you see, this time they are giving you a mark for this. Last two questions, they did not. But now they want exchange rate की definition. It is the rise or fall in the international price of a good due to the market forces of demand and supply of the currency. So understanding that there is a likely to be a depreciation of the exchange rate. So depreciation क्यों होगा? Because of the fall and because of the increase in the supply. They haven't asked for a diagram, so diagram is irrelevant. I guess that's why they are giving you more marks, because there's no diagram here. Diagram hota to maybe things might have changed. But वही depreciation की 2 mark के लिए demand का fall होना और supply का increase होना is there. They have written or over here. I don't know why they've written or over here, because the third mark is for that. So they should not be. बट आई गेस आई अंडरस्टैंड कि उसकी केस के अंदर हो सकता है, एंड और दोनों हो सकता है. बट दिस और इज के इफ दिस हैपेंस और दिस हैपेंस, दोनों की वजह से होगा, बट यू हैव टू राइट दिस. ओके, दैट मेक सेंस. फिर डेप्रिसिएशन की वजह से एक्सचेंज रेट विल रिड्यूस. उसकी वजह से आपकी इंपोर्ट की जो प्राइस है, एक्सपोर्ट की जो प्राइस है वो गिर जाएगी, इंपोर्ट की जो प्राइस है वो राइज हो जाएगी. दे गिविंग 1 mark ओनली फॉर दैट, जिसकी वजह से x माइनस एम पे कोई इम्पैक्ट आएगा. आई वुड रिकमेंड यू टू डू द होल थिंग दैट वी बीन डूइंग. एंड इवेंचुअली जब एडी चेंज होगा, आर यू लुकिंग हियर, यहां पर इन्होंने खास एक एडी का मेंशन के ऊपर 1 mark दिया है. दैट मींस इट्स अ कंपल्सरी थिंग दैट यू हैव टू राइट. एंड देन इवेंचुअली एडी जब राइट पे जाएगा या लेफ्ट पे जाएगा, उसकी वजह से what will happen to real output. First, they want our discussion कि AD बढ़ेगा because of the depreciation. Um, Over here, yeah, okay. So all of this needs to be there, by the way. Okay. So 1 mark for the price का discussion कि prices will fall for exports. तो 1 mark आपका इस पे अब मिल रहा है. दूसरा mark आपका मिल रहा है कि exports revenue will rise and AD will rise as a result. पूरा कनेक्शन का मिल रहा है. If one of these two is missing, your mark goes away. और ये value of exports लिखा हुआ है. Value. So if you say price of export falls and quantity of exports will rise, therefore AD will rise. Nope. Export की quantity से तुम direct AD को shift कराओगे. That's not correct. You have to connect it to export revenue. तो जब आप export revenue लिखते हो, that's the same thing as the value changing. Okay, and then AD increases, तो फिर जब AD बढ़ता है तो आपका real output में increase आता है. And then will it always happen? तो फिर they want an elasticity का discussion with the whole full capacity. तो एक अगर हम full capacity के ऊपर हैं, like over here, and if AD increases, it will not. But if we are under capacity, it may. Okay, so that is one of the discussions that they are ready to give. Or they're also okay agar aap elasticity ke saath discussion karte hain, which we just did in the previous essay, that if your good is elastic, then exports revenue will rise. But if exports are inelastic, then it won't change much and your exports revenue will fall. So it will not cause a major impact. You understand that? So ye is tarike se the question is being dealt with. Okay. Other than that,